We are facing a massive national health crisis, and let's be honest, the usual advice just isn't cutting it. Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful idea. What if the root cause of chronic disease isn't just about our individual choices, but about something called an upstream address? We're going to trace this problem all the way back to its source. So let's just dive right in with a question that seems so simple, but for millions of people, it's anything but. Why? Why is it so incredibly hard to be healthy? To really get a handle on the scale of what we're talking about, just look at this number. The CDC reports that a staggering 90% of our country's annual healthcare spending is for people with chronic and mental health conditions. I mean, that's not a small leak in the boat. That's a flood. Right, so this isn't some side issue. This is a foundational crisis for our nation's health, for our economy, and for the longest time, the advice has been pretty straightforward. Just make better choices. But what if that advice is missing the entire point? What if it's not the real story? Here's the thing. Our choices don't just happen in a vacuum. We decide what we're going to eat inside a system that's already been designed for us. A system full of specific price signals, incredibly complex supply chains, and, let's face it, overwhelming convenience that nudges us in a very specific direction. And this is what leads us to this powerful new concept. See, to truly understand the problem, we have to look beyond our dinner plate. We have to go upstream and take a hard look at the system that filled it in the first place. This visual just captures that shift in perspective perfectly. On the one side, you've got the common view. Health is the steep mountain, and it's up to your individual willpower to climb it. But the system view asks a totally different question. What if the path itself is designed to make the unhealthy choice the easiest one to take? This totally reframes the problem. It's not about personal failure anymore. It's about environmental design. And this is the core idea right here, the upstream address. It's the set of conditions, the incentives, the processing, the production systems that determine what food is available, what's affordable, and what's appealing, long before you or I ever walk into a grocery store. So you can actually break this upstream address down into 4 key areas. First, you've got commodity incentives. Think government subsidies for things like corn. That makes high fructose corn syrup incredibly cheap, so surprise, surprise, it becomes the default sweetener in everything. Second, the processing environment, which is all about shelf life and profit. Third, the industrial model for animal production. And last, a real lack of information and visibility that pretty much keeps us in the dark about how our food is actually made. So to really wrap our heads around the upstream address, let's try to map out this industrial system that gets food from the farm all the way to our table. The author Michael Pollan has a name for this. He calls it a national eating disorder. He argues that our whole food system is built on this industrial logic that's all about cheap inputs, and that deliberately hides where our food comes from. Industrial novelty has basically replaced the cultural wisdom that used to guide how we ate. And building on that, the author John Robbins focuses in on industrial animal agriculture. His work shows a really key part of the model. It concentrates harms, like pollution, and then pushes the costs of that onto the public and the environment. The whole system really only works because the true consequences are kept out of sight. Okay, so this brings us to a fundamental question, right? If a calorie is just a calorie, does it really matter how our food is made? Does the processing part of this upstream address actually change how our bodies react to food? Well, a landmark trial from the NIH gave us a pretty stunning answer. Researchers took 2 groups of people and gave them diets that were perfectly matched for calories, protein, and fat. The only major difference was that one group ate ultra-processed foods. The result? That group automatically ate 500 more calories a day and gained weight, while the other group actually lost weight. It proved that the processing itself, not just the nutrients, is what drives overconsumption. Okay, so if the problem is literally baked into the design of the system, then the solution has to be systemic, too. This isn't about blaming people anymore, it's about changing the system. So let's look at a really pragmatic 6-pillar plan to do exactly that. So instead of looking for one magic bullet, the solution that's proposed is this comprehensive 6-pillar plan. It's all about changing the defaults in our environment. This means using the power of our institutions to make healthy food the standard, using price signals to make it cheaper, and improving labeling so we actually know what we're eating. It also means rebuilding our cooking culture, dealing with the environmental harms, the externalities of production, and funding research that measures what really matters for our health. Pillar 1 kicks off with our public institutions, We're talking schools, hospitals, government agencies. Now, why there? Because they have immense purchasing power. By requiring them to prioritize minimally processed foods, you can change the food environment for millions of people, like overnight, automatically. Pillar 2 tackles the economics of it head-on, because the simple truth is that education and willpower, as great as they are, often just can't compete with price and convenience. So this pillar uses incentives to make whole foods cheaper and way more accessible, especially for the people who need it most. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. Brazil gives us a powerful, real-world example. Their national dietary guidelines are revolutionary. Instead of just focusing on nutrients, they explicitly tell their citizens to avoid ultra-processed foods. They've made food processing a core public health issue. So how do we actually turn this plan from a bunch of ideas into a concrete project? Let's take a look at the timeline for making health the default setting in our society. You can see the plan is designed for a phased, measurable rollout over 10 years. It starts small with pilots, then it scales up the programs that work, like new purchasing standards and clear labeling. And what's crucial here is that it's designed to iterate and adapt based on data, making sure we're tracking what actually improves people's health. You know, in the end, it all just comes down to this one simple idea. If chronic disease has an upstream address, then our solutions have to operate upstream. We simply can't solve a systemic problem with individual willpower alone. We have to go to the source. The question isn't whether we can, it's whether we're ready to change the address.